法国的一个前总理，他说只要郭文贵就和解，所有现在在香港查封资产、国内资产全部都还给他，管的基金的，包括 UBS 官司损失的钱一分不少的给他，前提是永远不能再对 UBS 起诉。第二，在香港查封的资产，他永远不追究这个查封的这个后果责任。我们光在那个新加坡的那个叫什么银行 DBS， 光那一个账就几十亿现金，光资产都是几百个亿。你想想，你共产党宣传到现在就是七哥没钱了，头两天还黑盖特上的七哥没钱了。你见过真正的中国人有像七哥这么曾经有财富有钱有几个？你告诉我，包括马云，比现金差远了。任何一个中国企业负债率上真正的最后现金没有一个能比得上七哥的企业，一个都没有，就是我们的家族企业。那么这个当时来这个代表说了一句话，其中一个人跟我很熟的，就是刘延平的很好的一哥们，他说刘延平这个事情跟你打交道，老郭对你佩服的五体投地，说你们一定要相信，郭文贵要把 UBS 案子给你启动了，你所有共产党在海外的金融界的钱都会被挖出，一分都不会剩。那他们怕这个，你知道，兄弟姐妹，你们真没概念呢。中国在过去从大清朝国民党、共产党到现在只有一个国家，就连伊拉克、罗马尼亚、卡扎菲都没有中国那么夸张，因为中国的历史太长了，钱太大了。在瑞士是最大的黑金来源，这些钱必须还给中国人。中国人所有现在欠的信用卡的钱，所有欠的房贷，所有欠的银行的钱都不用还。大概是多少钱呢？中国共产党说是51万亿美元、40万亿美元，但真正的价值就是几条泡沫以后，实际上就是4到5万亿美元。我们在海外能找回多少钱呢？我在海外能找回50万亿美元，就中国人免10回都没问题。我们到那时候就让中国人最起码做到，任何人孩子，当然中国以后免费教育，所有的都有的这个免费保险，这起码的。再一个，墓地绝对不能收钱，火葬场也不能收钱，这是起码的。生不花钱，死不花钱，教育不花。
Now you have just watched a clip from Mr. Miles Guo's past live stream talking about the UBS's role in how it helps the CCP's kleptocrats to hide its dirty money which stole from the Chinese people. Welcome to the CCP Reality Check Special Series. This is the Series 3, and this is a new series of this special series. In this live stream, we are going to explore an unusual case that would reveal one of the most important means in the CCP's collusion with the Western elites. Before we move on, we would like to encourage you to leave questions or comments in the chat section, and I will read them during and close to the end of the live stream. And for now, let's get into the subject of tonight's episode, which is the UBS Group AGA and its link to the CCP. And it links to the theme of how the CCP infiltrate and weaponize world's large banks to achieve its agenda. So let's start with, what is the UBS Group? You may be wondering, what is the entity we're talking about tonight? The UBS Group AG, which is the Aktiengesellschaft, which is also called Joint Stock Enterprise, is a very, very old bank company. It has over 100 years in the banking industry. And UBS is actually operating as a global conglomerate. Do not forget, it's actually operating in 50 countries around the world. Moreover, it is the largest bank in Switzerland, especially after its acquisition of Credit Suisse in this year. So since UBS is in Switzerland, it has benefited from the Swiss strict laws against consumer information disclosure. Well, because of this, people from different backgrounds like to save or hide their money in Switzerland, which of course includes dictators, their families, and the CCP kleptocrats. So we listed, and money in the UBS is not exempted from this phenomenon in Switzerland, because UBS is also hosting a large amount of money from dictators and totalitarian regimes. We have selected several examples for you. These include Khomeini's family, and everyone knows that Khomeini is an Iranian theocratic dictator. It also includes the CCP's kleptocrats, include Jiang Zemin, who is the former CCP's president, and Wang Qishan, who is the CCP's former vice president. Now, hold on. You may start wondering, having these dirty treasures hidden in the UBS is indeed worrying. But what does that have to do with the CCP's organization of the world's large banks and other financial institutions to achieve its agenda? That question can be answered by the fact that the UBS is the first preferably treated foreign financial service provider in communist China. So, how does that link to the CCP regime? Well, let's be honest, generally it is impossible for foreign entities to operate in the communist China independently. What must they do? In order to enter the market in the communist China, according to the CCP's orders or several other so-called regulations you've seen so far, they must be in a joint adventure with the CCP's financial service providers, such as the Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, etc. You may wonder, if that is true, then are there any exceptions? One may wonder, even as the one appears to be exceptions. Well, those which appear to be exempted are not exemptions at all, because we have to remind you, to become one of those so-called exemptions, they have to be willingly and fully submit to the CCP's control and serve the CCP's agenda, both in the rest of the world and inside the communist China. Moreover, it needs to have extremely close ties to the CCP's kleptocratic leaders and their family members. So how does it manifest itself? Well, we happen to stumble upon, of course, the past revelation by Mr. Miles Guo about the UBS nomination of Sun Yao as the CEO of the UBS Asia. So you might be asking, now who is this Sun Yao? Where does she come from? Well, Sun Yao is the granddaughter of Yao Yilin. Yao Yilin is the CCP's former vice premier, and Sun Yao is the niece of Wang Qishan's wife, and Wang Qishan is the CCP's second most powerful man. Sun Yao is not the only example, just to bear in mind, because the CCP's kleptocrats offsprings are top UBS executives in the communist China, and the inheritance of power would occur to these kleptocrats' offspring regardless of their legitimacy. You might start thinking, what do you mean by legitimacy? Well, that means whether they are legitimate or illegitimate children, they will be put in these key positions. Well, let's take a pause because I know you may be shocked. So what is the purpose of all of these things? So by doing this, the CCP is using it, especially kleptocrats, in particular, they are using it as a way to consolidate the control of entities in the hands of the CCP's kleptocratic leaders and their family members. So now we have to introduce another important person, which is related to this case against the UBS. So who is Mr. Miles Guo? We have talked about him in our past live streams, but we are going to bring you a very quick review about him. He is the founders and the owners of the Pangu 7-star Hotel and Yuda Palace Hotel before he left the communist China. And during the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games, Pangu 7-star Hotel was the first ever hotel in the communist China to receive the highest rating in the tier. And built in 1997, Yuda Palace Hotel was one of the earliest luxurious hotels in the communist China. And just to remember, Mr. Miles Guo is the first in the world to warn about the CCP's bioweapon plan 13579, which is also known as the COVID-19, and he also warned about the CCP's infiltration to the free world via bribery and intelligence infiltration, which is also known as the BGI plan. So Mr. Miles Guo is the #1 enemy of the CCP regime, and he's the leader of the Chinese whistleblower movement. But the CCP, therefore, robbed of Mr. Miles Guo hundreds of billions worth of assets and properties from Miles and his family. The CCP also jailed and tortured thousands of Miles' business partners and employees. Some were even killed. And this is exactly what happened. So after all these background information introduction, we would like to bring you a synopsis of the case we're going to look into today, which is called Guo versus UBS AG. So it is all start in autumn 2013 when Mr. Miles Guo decided to invest around $3 billion in Haitong. At the time, he was approached by a managing director of wealth management at the UBS Hong Kong branch in particular, and his name is Stephen Wang. So Stephen Wang told Miles that UBS wished to participate in this deal by helping Mr. Miles Guo invest via a third-party firm called Dawn State, which is a CCP entity. And when the deal is signed, the CCP paid, not the CCP, I'm sorry, the UBS paid the loan to the Dawn State with a mandatory prepayment clause that is included. And this clause means that UBS can sell all the shares of stocks within a short time when they fall under a certain price point. So you may think up to now that these are just some very normal mistakes that can be made by one way or the other, but there are some very, very important details for all of us to pay attention to, because UBS has been intentionally misleading Mr. Miles Guo. So it all comes as follows. Stephen Wang, who represents the UBS, verbally communicated with Miles and misled him by saying the following, that Miles should not worry about the mandatory prepayment clause. Stephen also said that the UBS will give Miles additional time to pay back loans if Miles needs to. And the UBS indicates that Miles Guo's share of Haitong securities would not be liquidated below the price he bought in when an event triggered the liquidation, aka the mandatory prepayment. At the end, UBS also said that it will give Miles Guo preferable treatment in loans that provided to a shareholder of the Ping An Insurance Company and a CCP regime's entity, of course, which received. So according to Mr. Miles Guo, that UBS only gives oral guarantees, but these guarantees are not written and were not written at a time in the document. So I think up to this point, you may be wondering, what do you mean by the favorable treatment for the shareholder of Ping An Group? So Ping An Group's wait a minute. So what I'm saying, a favorable treatment for the shareholder of Ping An Group, it means that there will be a mechanism in the UBS's loan agreement to protect the shareholders' financial interest if Ping An's shares fall below a certain level. The details of that package were privately negotiated. Only a few senior bankers and executives were aware of the precise complex details. And just to let you remember, the Ping An stock the stock shares lost its value in July 2015 when the Communist China stock market crashed. It is grave enough to trigger a mandatory prepayment like the one that we're about to see below. But during this case, no such mandatory prepayment happened. So you might wonder what is happening. Let's take a look at part 2. So time progressed into January 2015. Oh, by the way, before I continue, this is a screenshot from the court document, and it's issued from the London High Court. So this is trying to just let you know that every of the facts we have been taken on here are actually taken from the original document and the judgment issued by a justice in the London High Court. So let's continue to take a look at what happened in the second part. So in January 2015, Mr. Miles Guo left the Communist China and started whistleblowing to expose the CCP's corruptions, infiltrations, and sabotage against the free world. But on January 10th, 2015, Bruno Wu, of whom we mentioned is a registered far-right agent with a number 6611, threatened Mr. Miles Guo. And Bruno Wu threatened Miles Guo to tell him that he must either return to the Communist China immediately or his family will be all arrested and his assets will be liquidated. Just to remind you with a background information that Bruno Wu has deep-rooted connections to the CCP's Kleptocrats. And also, we have to remind everyone that anyone who returned to the Communist China under the order of the CCP might be disappeared, killed, jailed, or placed under house arrest. So that means it would be very, very dangerous for anyone to return in that kind of situation. So you may think, then what does the CCP has been taken action, or what kind of action has the CCP Kleptocrats taken any kind of action like this? We were going to take a look at this part. Its time progressed into July the 1st, 2015. The Communist China stock market, it crashed. And Wang Qishan, before that crash, somewhere after January, but before the crash, told UBS to execute mandatory prepayment to sell Mr. Miles Guo's stock in Haitong Securities at an extremely low price. And that kind of execution is to be acted as a precondition of attaining the favorable treatment in the Communist China for the UBS. So Miles Guo was given at the time a very short time period to pay off the $3 billion loan, which was loaned by the UBS to the Dong state. And in that kind of very short time, it was impossible to gather such a huge amount of cash, $3 billion, just for you to have an impression of how large it is. Also, Mr. Miles Guo requested for additional time, as Stephen Wong mentioned, and he had a guaranteed. And Miles also mentioned that he had the ability to repay the loan at the time. But that doesn't. We will see later that kind of request of additional time doesn't happen. Let's take a look, see what happens next. When the UBS is going to execute that mandatory prepayment, the UBS only spent 20 seconds to find a buyer for the stock shares that were originally worth $3 billion, but only sold for 4.5 million. If I speak a little bit too fast, I would like to share with you again the detail. The UBS just used only 20 seconds to find a buyer for the stock shares that were originally worth $3 billion, but only sold for $4.5 million. And usually, such a sheer volume of stock shares would need over a week at least to find a buyer. So just to remind you, the execution of the mandatory prepayment agreement in this, its mandatory prepayment clause in this case was actually contrary to the favorable treatment, contrary to the no worry statement concerning the mandatory prepayment clause that were all being guaranteed to Mr. Miles Guo by the UBS representative, and followed the order. UBS, remember, the UBS is actually following the order from Wang Qishan, the then premier of the CCP regime. So you maybe start thinking, 20 seconds with a originally worth $3 billion worth of stock can be found in 20 seconds. Then who is the stock buyer? We are very interested in knowing him. Let me take a pause to see if any one of us have think of any questions. Okay. So this stock buyer here is Pacific Alliance Group, chaired by Wei Jianshan. And Wei Jianshan, we have already mentioned before, he is a high-ranking CCP spy. Wei Jianshan is directly involved in luring a large portion of the US pension funds to be invested in CCP-controlled entities in Communist China. Wei Jianshan was also created and participated in the Thousand Talents plan for the CCP to steal intellectual property from the United States. So now everything is very clear that this entire execution of military prepayment is a setup, and it's an action. It's something that the CCP done, what is a part of the actions that the CCP is trying to destroy Mr. Miles Guo. But you may be wondering, so how does UBS related to this? That refers back to the topic of the BGY. So let's review what is the BGY. The BGY refers to the following. B means blue, it refers to intelligence infiltration to the West. Gold, it refers to bribery and corruption through money. Yellow refers to the act of providing sexual favors to corrupt or to bribe, and later using the sexual relationship videotaped to blackmail the Western elites or figures in key positions into working for the CCP regime. Often children are involved in sexual bribes. So now we know what is BGY, and we have reviewed that concept. So let's take a look at the question, how is the UBS related to the CCP's BGY plan? So we will see that Mr. Miles Guo had revealed in his past live stream that the CCP utilizes the UBS to bribe politicians in Taiwan to make them work for the interest of the CCP, and the CCP utilizes the UBS to establish channels to bribe Western elites of extremely high level. So what does the CCP want from Western elites? So I think the answer could be very clear, but I cannot make any assumption or conclusion here. But once we listed the facts out here, it should be very clear. But we also listed to help you to take a look, what kind of role does the UBS play in the CCP's BGY plan, which is to acting as a bridge to acting in a way to assist the CCP, not to assist, I'm sorry, but just to a way that the CCP utilize UBS to bribe politicians in Taiwan to make them work for the interest of the CCP, and also the UBS becomes some kind of connections between the CCP and the Western elites of extremely high level. So now we're seeing a lot of these things, then we will explore the CCP's relationship with the UBS in detail in the next episode of the series. So stay tuned, because they will be very extensive and they will be helping us to take a look how does the CCP utilizing these big institutions and weaponizing them against the free world in detail. So now we would like to say again to take down the CCP and free Miles Guo now, because Miles Guo is a victim of the CCP's weaponization of the US judicial apparatus, and the UBS is playing a role in the CCP's BGY plan against the free world and against the United States, of course. So before we end, we would like to take a look at the chat section to see if there's any questions or anything we would like to take a look. So seems like there's no questions, and we're thanking for everyone today. Even you have sent a kind of emoji or certain other things in the chat. I thank you for participating. Well, then we will be seeing you next time if we are talking about the same topic, to take a deeper look on how the CCP infiltrating, weaponizing the big banks or big financial institutions, weaponizing them against the West, and we will be taking a look deeper at the extensive relationship between CCP and these institutions. I'm your host, David Stollinger, and that is all for tonight. Stay tuned.
The noise of gunfire rose from all over the center of Peking.
We're in too much. 10 minutes clear. Why? Why? I think this is my duty.
不是什么神秘人物，不是什么富翁，这个都是过去媒体因为不了解、不知道嘛。